Hi everybody, so this is going to be a shorter video because we don't have as much information to cover as we did in part 1. So for part 2, the topics of media covered in series issues that we're going to talk about today are hurricane preparedness, imaginary friends, and breakups in the aftermath. If you don't like Friends, we're talking about that episode at the end of the video, and you can just shut the video off after we finish talking about Sesame Street. Um,
Now, Sesame Street, the reason why we want to do this is because it's been a long time stable for children's television.
we grew up with it, our parents grew up with it, this generation is growing up with it. Sesame Street has been on since 1969. It's now 2023, so it's been on for like 50 plus years.
That's right.
My favorite character was always Elmo, followed by probably Rosita, the Blue Monster, and followed by Cookie Monster.
And I have always liked characters like Big Bird and Snuffy and also Mr. Snuffleupagus with Big Bird. And he is a subject of what our first topic is going to be about because of the imaginary friends issue. Now, before our generations, from a period of 14 years, 1971 through 1985, if you were watching Sesame Street and you knew about Big Bird's best friend, Mr. Aloysius Snuffleupagus, then you would remember that the adults on Sesame Street thought Big Bird was just using his imagination because we all, when we were kids, probably had imaginary friends at one time or another.
I did.
So whenever Snuffy came by and helped Big Bird as being best friends, Big Bird knew that it was his reality and he was doing some real stuff, but the adults never believed him. And this led to topics of substance and child abuse and parents believing that the children would not be truthful or tell the truth. But Big Bird was telling the truth. And there were also lots of other analogies, and the writers of Sesame Street running out of ideas for near misses. So finally, this issue was corrected in the first episode of season 17 in 1985.
So the more recent episodes of Sesame Street that have discussed imaginary friends are centered around Elmo and Zoe having a pet rock named Rocco. We watched the earlier episodes of this whole issue with Zoe and Rocco, and I really enjoyed this episode, but there have been other episodes that talk about imaginary friends, which the film theorist has reviewed. This is Matt Pat GT. He has reviewed other episodes of that talk about the imaginary friends, and he basically said in his video, we didn't get to watch these specific episodes about imaginary friends, but basically these episodes talked about how Zoe was kind of manipulating Elmo to believe that Rocco was real when he really wasn't real, and this was really making Elmo mad because he was basically losing out on things such as his favorite cookie or a turn on the swing, and this really made him upset, and the adults in the situation never really stood up for Elmo and noticed that he was mad, unlike in the episode that we watched where Alan, the Hooper store owner guy, he was basically encouraging Elmo and Zoe's creativity with Rocco, the imaginary friend. But in these later episodes that Matt Pat GT reviewed on the Film Theorists, they were basically saying how it just makes Elmo so mad that he's not being listened to by the other adults, and I just felt that was unfair for him to deal with, and not very nice of Zoe. So how would you rank the episodes about imaginary friends that we watched?
The first one really is a classic episode for the season premiere when the adults finally got to see Mr. Snuffleupagus, because it has great classic segments and even has a cameo guest star appearance by former talk show host Phil Donahue. He comes in at the scene where, while Big Bird was with Elmo, before Elmo was really popular, about his plan to get Mr. Snuffleupagus to be seen, the adults who were not believing Big Bird thought his plan was just silly.
Right.
But the adults who did start to believe him, like Maria and Gordon and Linda, they thought Big Bird's plan was not silly.
No.
So this was a little bit of a controversy, and Phil decided to let everybody agree or disagree to the banner. But then when the adults finally saw them, Mr. Snuffleupagus on Sesame Street for the first time, they finally realized that Big Bird did have a right to be angry, and they should have listened to him in the first place, and they promised they would from then on. Whereas we talked about Rocco with Zoe and Elmo, I thought that was more kind of hurting Elmo's feelings that adults were not getting the picture.
Right. Well, we didn't watch the episodes that Matt Pat reviewed. We watched an earlier episode where Alan, the grocery store
Mm-hmm.
guy, was with Zoe, and so that was a better episode. We haven't watched the episodes that Matt Pat reviewed, and maybe we will watch those at a later time and review them if we can find them.
But so
Um,
far, I would rank the Snuffleupagus scene for the first time a complete A. But I think the one that we saw with the play date for Rocco, it's okay. I think I would give it a B, but we'll see about the other ones because this is a different time periods for our generations when Sesame Street was on. With
right.
Rocco and Zoe, they would just have extra segments on Sesame Street that was just like the street story, which is one segment of the story itself. Whereas the old days when we had Sesame Street, the street stories took place in different segments, and there was a lot more good inserts along with that.
Yes, I agree. I agree with your ranking of the episode that we watched about Zoe and Elmo and the one about Mr. Snuffleupagus.
And now we're going to deal with what's the next gene?
Sesame Street Hurricane Preparedness.
Now, we were talking about on an earlier video of how Gene and I were preparing for when we had a couple weeks ago Tropical Cyclone Lee, which actually did not turn out to be very potent here in Portland compared to Eastern Maine or New Brunswick or Nova Scotia. But we did prepare, and in the 2001 episode, for the final five new episodes of that season 32, the gang on Sesame Street had prepared for a hurricane that was about to hit Sesame Street,
Right.
and it hit on the first episode. But the remainder of the week was when Big Bird was almost kind of saddened because of the loss of his home, his nest, but his friends pitched in to help.
Right.
And so that gives you a good example of why fellowship and teammanship is important. Plus, we also want kids to be aware when natural disasters strike, just so that they could be aware of if something like this ever occurs.
And I think Sesame Street did a good job talking about how you should prepare for a hurricane and how you should help your friends in the aftermath if their home gets damaged. So I think this episode deserves an A minus.
I think so.
So the other episode we wanted to talk about today before we talk about Friends is Golden Girls 3 on a Couch, where they're all at therapy together. So this serious issue is about feuding and people fighting. So, um,
And the girls themselves share stories of examples on why one gets so uncomfortable with another.
yeah. I mean, this episode is definitely certainly realistic, and I have gone to counseling before to talk about issues I've had with my friends. We've actually never sat down together to deal with the issues we've had with each other, and to be honest, sometimes I really wish we did because I think that would have been helpful, but um some people just don't like to cooperate, I guess.
But
So,
that's why we have therapists and people who help each other in real life.
right. So what how would you rank that Golden Girls episode?
It's a good episode. I give it a B plus.
So do I. And lastly, today we wanted to talk about the topic of breakups in the aftermath. This focuses on the season 3 episode of Friends, episode 18, the one without the ski trip. This takes place after Ross and Rachel's breakup, where the rest of the friends are figuring out how to spend equal time with Rachel and Ross after their breakup. And I mean, this episode was sort of boring. I didn't really like it as much as I liked some of the other episodes that we have reviewed about Friends. I gave it a C plus for relatability. It's definitely a 10 because we can definitely relate to how the other characters feel about having to pick and choose who you should hang out with, because in situations that we were in with our friends from New Hampshire when they dealt with tricky relationship issues, we definitely had issues with planning events so that way we could keep everybody happy and not have fights break out at events. And this was not only difficult for the two of us, but it was also difficult for other people in the group who had to plan activities. So everybody in our group of friends from New Hampshire can certainly relate to this episode, I think. And I'm not going to mention names about when specifically in time we dealt with having to handle people's breakups and planning activities around the couples that were broken up, but I think people should be automatically be able to guess who we might be talking about. You don't need to share that in the comments, but if you know, you know. So how would you rank the one without the ski trip?
I gave that one a B plus.
Oh, okay. Why did you give it such a different ranking than me?
What did you give it?
C plus.
Okay, so we'll go in between that. I thought it would turn into a good story, and I also thought the part with Phoebe and her taxi makes it more of an adventure.
That's true. But like the reason why I didn't like it so much was because I connected way too much to the plot. I don't know if that was the point of the episode, but I just didn't enjoy too much and I didn't think it was funny. I thought
Mm.
the plot was kind of boring. And there are several other episodes like this, like um one episode that we have recently um watched, no, well, maybe not so recently, but another episode that is like this is the one with the bullies where Ross and Chandler are dealing with the coffee house bullies. I also gave that a C plus because of how easy it is to relate to it and how stupid the plot was. I didn't think the plot made much sense in the comedy show. So that was another C plus ranked episode.
Okay, we hope you enjoyed this weekend as we were able to split our videos down on serious topics, and I hope everybody had a good Columbus Day weekend. And make sure that when you are with your friends and think about topics, how more important it is to be helpful rather than make fun of them.
In our next video, which is going to be out on October 28th, we will be reviewing um, Halloween and thriller movies. We will be reviewing Brigadoon at Manchester Community Theatre Players. We will be reviewing, for serious issues, we will be talking about breakups in the aftermath centered around Monica and Richard's relationship. We will be talking about climate change and Wally. And we will be talking about um there must be Encanto
Hmm.
and intergenerational trauma, and talking about where we would rank the characters and their magical powers, and also Matt Pass fan theory about Dolores being the villain. So stay tuned. That video will be out at 1 p.m. on October 28th. And
Oh,
hopefully I will be able to also review Lessons in Chemistry and Love Theoretically. It just depends if Love Theoretically is finished by then and me and Anna can have a meeting to discuss the books together.
okay, that concludes our weekend here.